Welcome, everyone, to a almost New Year's Eve presentation of Cartels, Conspiracies, and Camarena. I'm Jack Llewellyn, and before we get into the topic of the day, I want to say happy holidays to everyone out there. And I say happy holidays not because I'm afraid to say Merry Christmas, because I say Merry Christmas an awful lot, but I want to make sure that everybody listening, no matter what you believe, don't believe, celebrate, whatever, I hope it was a great season for you. I hope that 2025 is a wonderful year that sees people being healthy and productive and happy. So, happy holidays, happy new year to absolutely everyone listening out there. All right, today we're going to talk about two things, and this will probably be a somewhat abbreviated episode just by the very nature of this, but I want to talk about two things of importance today. Number one, we're going to talk about the rearrest of Mini Licenciado, and then we're going to talk relatively briefly about what I consider a completely failed and misguided system by the United States and the Department of Justice and others. So with that, let's talk about Mini Licenciado. His real name is Damaso Lopez Serrano, and he is the son of Damaso Lopez Nunez, El Licenciado. The father, El Licenciado, was born in Mexico in 1966. He studied law but didn't actually graduate. That's where his nickname comes from. He was at one point in time the commander of the Judicial Police of Sinaloa and a agent of the Public Prosecutor's Office. He also served for a time as the Deputy Director of Security and Custody of the prison known as Punta Grande. Well, El Licenciado Damaso Lopez Nunez in 2021 helped El Chapo escape from Puente Grande, and he then was a collaborator with El Chapo and was a leader, and I'm putting air quotes there, of the Sinaloa Cartel after El Chapo was rearrested, at least two different times. I say that because there's lots of different ways to look at it, whether he was taking over for El Chapo. Of course, we know that El Mayo was still there. So I think the claims that you will see in numerous places saying he was the leader of the Sinaloa Cartel in El Chapo's absence are greatly exaggerated. In any event, El Licenciado was arrested in Mexico City. He was extradited to the United States. And in 2018, he was sentenced to life in prison for cocaine trafficking. He had actually pled guilty. He later received a reduction from life imprisonment to 14 years in prison. So at the present time, his release is scheduled for 2032. Now, he has a son, again, El Mini Licenciado. And I'm just going to call him El Mini because that's a whole lot easier. So Damaso Lopez Serrano kind of followed in his father's footsteps and was involved with the Sinaloa Cartel and drug trafficking, etc. In about 2017, there became a series of internal conflicts within the Sinaloa Cartel. Most particularly, El Mini ended up having some disagreements with or battles with Los Chapitos for the Chapo side of the business and of the cartel. as the story goes, feeling like he needed protection from Los Chapitos, in 2017, Lopez Serrano El Mini turns himself in. In 2018, he pled guilty. He accepted his role as a quote-unquote leader within the Sinaloa Cartel. He acknowledged that he had organized the transportation and distribution of thousands of kilograms of controlled substances, including methamphetamine, cocaine, and heroin for importation from Mexico into the United States. He also admitted to possessing firearms for the purpose of promoting the Sinaloa Cartel's drug trafficking activities. In part of his sentencing, El Mini was, I don't want to say praised, but recognized by, might be the right word, by the judge, who kind of believed the sincerity of his regret and noted at the time of sentencing that he had worked to compensate for the damage he caused in the Sinaloa Cartel. He was required to forfeit millions of dollars in proceeds, the drug trade proceeds. And most importantly, he agreed to and later did testify against El Chapo during El Chapo's 2019 trial in New York. Importantly, or of note, he was testifying against El Chapo, who was his godfather. It also is said that during his time in custody, El Mini provided crucial information that led to the capture and prosecution of other drug traffickers. And as a result, and a reward for his cooperation, he received a reduced sentence. So reduced, in fact, that in 2022, he was released, but he was under very strict probation conditions that would last until 2027. So, released in 2022, strict probation, supposed to be under those probation conditions for 5 years until 2027. During the time that he was released, El Mini has provided numerous interviews to media outlets. There's also the podcast Okran Leaks, which he may or may not have started and may or may not have been fully involved in, along with other people. That's rumor, innuendo. But there was this podcast that called out Sinaloa narcos, shared information, provided a lot of allegedly inside information, particularly in recent months, about the splintered Sinaloa cartel. So everything was good for El Mini, right? Well, that came to an end on December 12, 2024. FBI agents raided and arrested El Mini at his house in Washington, Virginia. Specifically, he is accused of reoffending in fentanyl trafficking and using his home as a base to coordinate operations with the Sinaloa cartel. We won't go into a great deal of detail on the charges at this point, but let's just say that the evidence was pretty good in the arrest warrant and some other documents that are publicly filed. For example, there were phone calls that were tapped and recorded. There were videos and audiovisual material that connected him to the Maiza faction of the CDS. A number of informants collected key evidence against him. He was arraigned in federal district court on December 16th, and he was denied bail. That's a big surprise. the court, in denying bail, listed a couple of factors. One of those was his high risk of flight, given his experience with the Sinaloa Cartel, and also the severity of the charges, which again included fentanyl trafficking and probation violation. Nothing was really said in that regard as to his kind of going back on the plea bargain agreement and the conditions for his early release. So what happens now? Well, there's two possibilities. One is that he gets resentenced and reconvicted and resentenced in the United States. And you have to assume that if that's the case, he's going to get a as severe a sentence as one could get under the charges that he might be convicted to or convicted of. The other is that he may also be extradited to Mexico. And you say, why would the United States want to do that? Well, almost immediately after El Mini was arrested in the United States, Mexico asked the United States to extradite him for his alleged involvement in the killing of journalist Javier Valdez. So Mexico's Prosecutor General, Alejandro Gertz, described El Mini as the, quote, mastermind, close quote, behind Valdez's slaying. We have already prosecuted the rest of the perpetrators and they are in jail, he said in a news conference. Valdez, again, a reporter or journalist, was shot and killed in his car on May 15th, 2017 in Culiacan, near the offices of the weekly newspaper Rio Dice that he worked at. Investigators believe that El Mini ordered the hit because he was angry about information Valdez published about the Sinaloa Cartel's internal power struggles. Remember, this is 2017, which makes it kind of interesting. Excuse me. Mexico has made several extradition requests for Lopez Serrano, but up until now, he had never had been really viewed by Washington favorably. Gertz, in talking about El Mini's rearrest, said that Mexico had on countless occasions asked for Lopez Serrano, El Mini, to be handed over, but, and these are his quotes, he had become a, quote, protected witness and, quote, was giving them a lot of information. He said that now that El Mini has been rearrested, there are more than enough reasons for the United States to grant Mexico's request for extradition. So that's what's happening. And I want to use this rearrest as a way to discuss a policy of the United States, of the Department of Justice, with respect to prosecutions of drug traffickers, and particularly those that can testify about others. My friend, the really good journalist, and I'm going to mention him again in a minute, but Ewan Grillo, calls it the narco snitch system. And we remember last episode, we talked a little bit about the surrender of Joaquin, or his involvement in getting El Mayo rendered into the United States and basically giving himself up, and that was part of a plan, or might have been part of a plan, maybe from El Chapo himself, but really with the idea of, if I'm a narco trafficker and, the heat gets too much, right? Or in Joaquin's case, I've got a wife who wants me out of the business, whatever. I can turn myself in, give up information, and I'm going to get a better sentence. And, I might get released, and we can talk about lots of the other people who are out there, right? So that seems to be a prolific and a fundamental part of the prosecution of drug traffickers from Mexico in the United States. And it goes back at least as far as the Camarena case. Remember, you've heard me rant and rave about this in the past. During the Camarena case, and parenthetically, lots of people working really hard to try to find Camarena's killers, okay? Understand that. But what we had was a system where dozens, maybe hundreds of potential witnesses were exposed to the government, given unknown amounts of money, right? Have no idea how many people were paid or how much money. No idea how many witnesses or potential witnesses were interviewed and allowed to stay in the United States, them or their families. No idea whatsoever. But what we do know for sure is that Jorge Godoy and Rene Lopez Romero testified in Zuno 2. We know for sure that they stayed in the United States. We know for sure that Rene Lopez Romero, when he was arrested for domestic violence, got released from those charges by virtue of his being called to testify or being prepared to testify in the Zuno case. We know for sure that they had committed a number of illegal activities in Mexico before they came to the United States. We know that they left Mexico because they feared for their safety and or their freedom. We know they were paid thousands and thousands and tens of thousands and maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars, and that they're still in the United States. We know all of that. And you know how many people they convicted as a result of their testimony? One. And he wasn't, even if you believed everything about Ruben Zuno Arce, even if you believe that, which of course I don't, but even if you did, we're not talking about Rafael Caro Quintero. We're not talking Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo. We're not talking about Don Neto. We're talking about somebody else who at best was involved in the conspiracy, at best. And what's even worse in that particular case is Rene Lopez Romero said that he was involved in the actual kidnapping of Camarena. Put to the side whether that's actually true or not. But think about it. Dozens, maybe hundreds of witnesses, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of dollars spent. Two very bad people, paid lots of money, allowed to stay in the United States, and, we'll overlook the fact that you committed domestic violence in the United States before you testified, and we'll also overlook the fact that you said that you kidnapped Agent Camarena. And we're going to do that because you're going to provide testimony against one person. And think about this, if you will, folks. It hasn't stopped there. Let's just think about El Mini, right? We talked about this case. So El Mini says, holy shit, Los Chapitos are going to kill me. It's better for me to go into the United States, give myself up, tell them everything I know, get on the stand, testify against my godfather, and I'll get a reduced sentence. It'll be wonderful. And what does he do for that? he goes back to fentanyl trafficking. But the point is, it's a great system, right? Make all the money you can, do all the things you want to do in Mexico as a bad guy, as a drug trafficker, as somebody bringing fentanyl into the United States, right? Public enemy number one, fentanyl trafficking. But because he's going to testify against El Chapo, because he might have other information about some other drug dealers, we're going to give him a reduced sentence. We're going to let him out. There's also stories that the Virginia house was actually a witness protection house. It was actually part, something that the government had provided. Be that as it may, where's the cost benefit here? I mentioned Ewan Grillo, who again I think is a wonderful journalist, and he's not even paying me to say that, but he has a blog called Crash Out by Ewan Grillo that you really ought to look at. And he has an article called The Narco Snitch System that I happen to be quoted in. And he talks about a couple of other people. He talks about La Barbie and El Grande. Yeah. Two people with the Beltran Leyva organization, who did unspeakable things, who both were apparently prepared to testify in the Garcia Luna trial, but didn't, but who are no longer in the custody of the U.S. prison system, almost undoubtedly are in witness protection somewhere. And, again, what did they bring? Well, they were going to testify against Garcia Luna. So we want El Chapo. We want Garcia Luna. We want Ruben Zuno Arce. So come bring whatever you have, and we'll get you your get out of jail free card. You'll do a little bit of time. El Chapo is down the road in Florence at Supermax and will die in Supermax, or whether figuratively or actually. And these people are somewhere living a quasi-free life. El Mini was in Virginia under strict probation. Well, it couldn't have been that strict because at some point he started fentanyl trafficking again. And we can go beyond just that. Remember last week we also talked about El Chupeta, the Colombian who had worked with the Medellin cartel. And he got a release after I guess he served about 20 years, but he's in Colombia now as a free person, and the Colombians are going crazy. And they're asking for justice. This week, we also have the story of Osiel Cardenas being released from custody. He gets rearrested once he gets into Mexico, but his sentence had also been somewhat reduced. More importantly, last week we talked about a video on Joaquin. Right? Are they in the process of saying, we can give you testimony about El Mayo? Joaquin, hey, I brought you El Mayo, but I can tell you a whole lot more about him. I can probably tell you about my brothers too, parenthetically, probably nothing that you don't know or nothing that's going to hurt them, but I'll give you stuff. That's their angle. Right? And so I ask you, and I know, again, I've got a lot of viewers and listeners who are, have been dealing with this strategy far longer than I, far more intimately than I. But at what point are we creating an incentive, as I said a moment ago, for people to try to get as much as they can, but knowing that if they're in trouble, if they're tired of the life, or as in El Mini's case, the heat is getting too much, the Chapitos are after them, the answer is give yourself up and provide evidence because you're going to get a better sentence. And even if you happen to get arrested and extradited, what are you going to do? What's the first thing you're going to say? What do you want to know about my bosses? Right? Think of the people who've been arrested recently working for the Chapitos. Isn't that the first thing you're going to say? Everybody else that I know who's been arrested has given up evidence and been, benefited from it, been rewarded for it. I think it's a tragically flawed system. It's probably something that we should talk about in more detail in another episode. But I wanted to bring it up here because I think El Mini's case provides a perfect example. Judge says, "Oh, I know. You know what? You really do seem to be remorseful, and you're giving us great information. So, I'm not going to give you the worst sentence ever." And then the government says, "Oh, he testified for El Chapo. Let him out early." And what had actually changed, apparently, by his actions and his conduct? Absolutely nothing. So where is the value? Where is the justice in that? Is it worth it? I've talked about it before. El Chapo went away, right? As I say, he's in that very small cell at Supermax, 23 hours out of the day. And what was the effect? Was there a major impact on the Sinaloa Cartel? Was there a major impact on the flow of drugs from Mexico into the United States since he went away? Is there enough of an impact by having convicted El Chapo to make worthwhile all the reduced sentences that related to information about or testimony against El Chapo? You can say the same thing about Garcia Luna. We can say the same thing about what's expected with El Mayo, and we can list other examples of it going all the way back to the Camarena case. If you think I'm wrong, if you think I'm totally off base, let me know. Come on in a future episode and we'll talk about it. We'll discuss it. All right. I told you this was going to be a little bit of a shorter one today. Holiday season, end of the year at law firms is an interesting time. So I appreciate you listening in. We're going to have a special guest next week, assuming I get it scheduled in time. So watch out for that. Again, happy New Year to absolutely everyone. And I will talk to you next week on cartels, conspiracies, and Camarena. Thanks, everyone.